Tonight, we are diving into one of the most powerful mysteries of soul work. These are the agreements we make before we are even born. Soul contracts, karmic agreements, and lessons. So these are patterns that feel too familiar, too intense, or too timely to be just mere coincidence. So rather, these are invitations to grow, to heal, and to remember who we really are and what we are here for. So tonight, join me as we explore the hidden agreements shaping your relationships, your life, and your spiritual path. So merry meet, I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin. And tonight we're here talking about soul contracts, the lessons you chose before birth. So if you are here with me live, say hi in the chat. Let us know that you are here. As always, there will be a Q&A at the end of this episode. So feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat, and I will also be watching that as I go. So we are going to dive in. There's a lot to talk about tonight. We're first going to start by talking about what are soul contracts and how do we know, how can we identify those in our lives? And then also, how can we know when soul contracts have been completed, for example? Or how can we understand what to do when we want to rewrite one? So merry meet, everybody. So welcome. Say hi in the chat. So let us dive in first. What is a soul contract? So, soul contracts are pre incarnational agreements that we make before we come to this plane. So, in order to believe in soul contracts, in order to do that kind of work, it presupposes that generally that we also believe in reincarnation. So many of these contracts will extend over different incarnations. So 2 weeks ago, we had an episode on past lives. And so for anybody who missed that, I will drop that in the chat when we have a pause in the episode tonight. And if you're watching back on YouTube, you will find that in the comments of the video. So I recommend going back if you are interested in how past lives work, how you can learn more about your past lives. This episode is not about this. This kind of work is not necessarily tied to us having to remember past lives. It's not really about memory or the stories that happened to us in other incarnations, which is oftentimes what we are exploring when we're trying to explore past lives. We want to know who we were, when we lived, where we lived, perhaps what our name was, what we did or didn't do. Here, this is work that carries across different lifetimes, and you really don't have to know anything about your past lives in order to identify soul contracts or karmic patterns or lessons that are ongoing in your life. So the one thing I do want to mention before we get deeper into this isn't necessarily about like your soul path or your life calling. This is more about identifying the places in your life where the lessons are taking place, the people who come in and out of your life to help you learn those lessons, hopefully. And also what to do when it's time to release some of those, because we actually have a lot more power than we believe. Sometimes we think that we're just kind of floating along in the sea of all of our incarnations that we do, and we don't have any control over what's going on when we're in them. And the reality is that we actually have more control than we think. So we'll be talking about that. But what a soul contract really is they are generally created around a lesson. They can be created around some kind of a necessary growth, and this growth is typically a growth that takes place across multiple incarnations, not just one, though it could. They can be lessons, or the soul contract can revolve around certain healing that you have to do in some way, whether that's physical healing or emotional healing or spiritual healing or all three. They can also have to do with mutual evolution. So we will have contracts sometimes with people or with groups of people. And so the idea there is that the entire group is in some kind of a pathway meant to evolve mutually together. So I'll be talking also about some of my own experiences with the contracts I've discovered in my own life. And one of those contracts does revolve around groups, so we'll be talking about that. But what I do encourage you is, if you're, whether watching live or watching in replay, share in the comments when things resonate with you. Are you aware of any soul contracts that you have? And as we go through, if any of the things I'm talking about kind of sparks an interest, or it starts to really tap into something inside of you, let us know. Because as many of us are empaths, maybe you don't necessarily consider yourself an empath, but you may be spiritually sensitive to energy. So you may feel certain things in your body when we are talking about a topic here. So that really resonates with you. To me, that's an indication that you should pay more attention to that thing that we're talking about. So you may feel something like a flutter in the heart. Sometimes people will feel like a drop in the stomach, or something in the something activating in the solar plexus. You might get chills. You might feel heat or sensations in your body, especially depending on how you experience energy. If you're clairsentient, you might feel a lot in your body. Or it could be a claircognizance where it just, there's a connection there. So pay attention to your body as we continue with the episode. Pay attention to your feelings, your thoughts, and where things feel like they resonate. Okay, so we're going to first talk about what are the different types of soul contracts. So there are soul contracts that revolve around learning. Now, these contracts, learning contracts, tend to be the most common. So this is something that you are here to learn in this lifetime. These often tend to be the most challenging as well. So they can be the ones that like are threaded throughout your life, and they pop up in multiple places. And sometimes what you may think that the work has been done, and you kind of go on, and for a period in your life it does appear like it has resolved, and then later a kind of a parallel experience will pop up. And if you understand about contracts, what you will realize at that point is that this is like the next step in the learning contract. So one of the things too that's important to remember, because a lot of these are repetitive and they happen over and over and they're meant to, is that to not get frustrated when the patterns reappear, in your life, rather to think about ways that we can identify them, try to figure out what they're trying to teach us at this level, which may be different than what they're trying to teach us at a different level when we were younger, or at a level later when we're older. Trying to figure that out, and trying to make those connections that way, rather than just getting frustrated by it. But believe me, I know, having dissected some of my own karmic lessons and some of my own soul contracts, it can be very frustrating when you thought you dealt with something, and then you only to see that a similar lesson resurface later in your life. So that's why we say these are often the most challenging of all of the contracts. Now, they tend to form around lessons that we are trying to master in this life, and like I said, they could extend from previous lifetimes as well. Now, learning contracts could show up in relationships where you have boundaries that are being tested. So you could have a soul contract surrounding standing up for yourself and securing boundaries. So you may notice boundaries getting tested in different places by different people, and that could be an indication that this is one of your contracts. You don't have just one, you have multiple ones perhaps that you are working on. Another way that a learning contract could show up in your life is through like when your self-worth is challenged. And so that is one particular one that I have identified in my own life, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. There can be times when courage seems to be required of you. That was something I definitely noticed with mine. It's like not something I wanted to do particularly. It didn't make me really excited because I knew how challenging it was going to be, and I knew how much courage I was going to have to muster up in order to traverse through it. But when the courage is required and we accomplish the thing, we have moved that much closer to completing that contract, and hopefully not having to continue it on in the next lifetime. We can evolve to a new contract than just repeating the ones over and over from past lifetimes. And then sometimes learning contracts will also revolve around places where we need to grow in an inner way. So where our inner growth is required, or where it needs to be, or where we need to be validated in some way. There can also be people who push us out of our comfort zones. Those people can often indicate that they're like triggering something revolving a soul contract. So let me give you an example, and then I'm going to go to the chat and I'm going to see if anybody has any other examples they want to share with us. So some people in Shadow Seekers probably know this story, some parts of this story. So this happened to me. Well, it really culminated and hit its apex in July and August of 2023. So about 2 years ago, and it's incredible to me that it's actually been that long ago because it feels like just yesterday, honestly, sometimes that I was going through it. But I work as an educational therapist, as some people know, in my muggle life. And then like I have this spiritual business. And this is actually hit its peak after I had already started the spiritual business, but it began before I did. And so I took a job in 2013 at a learning center in Toluca Lake, California. And I remember when I took this job, so I took a job with another educational therapist who had an established practice. And prior to that, I had been driving all over Los Angeles and I would just see families in their homes. So in order to take this job, it was going to be confined to this one learning center, and I was going to take less pay, but I felt it was a good trade-off for perhaps having more hours and then not having to do all that driving, because anybody who's contracted knows you don't often get paid for your driving, right? So I take this job, and at first things are pretty good. I was offered more hours, and I remember the very first year I received a raise, an hourly raise. So I was a contractor, so no insurance benefits, no nothing like that. It's just hourly pay. But I was getting more hours. I got this slight raise, and then the next year I didn't get a raise, and the next year I didn't get a raise, and the next year I didn't get a raise. And like 9 years later, I'm still working for the same price or the same rate that I'd worked with 9 years before. And it became very clear that there's no way to grow in this particular contracting job that I had. It's like you have to work more hours to make more money, and that is not possible. At a certain point, there's only a max number of students that you can see because it's very time consuming and it weighs on you emotionally and physically and everything like that. So to make a long story short, I would ask periodically for raises, or I would try to stand up for myself and say like I can't grow here without working more hours, and I can't work any more hours. And the woman who was in charge was not listening to me. At one point, kind of screamed at me about I was nothing without her. And so you could see there's some lessons here about growth, about trying to grow, about trying to find self-worth. So in the summer of 2023, going into the summer of 2023, all this is ongoing. I stayed in the position through the beginning of COVID because it was better to have work than to have nothing, like many people who had lost their jobs. And so I kind of endured it. I'd also gone online, so I didn't have to be around the woman. But it was just getting worse and worse. I started the spiritual business. I started Shadow Seekers, and I was like, I'm still working for this like crappy pay from 10 years ago in this other business. So I made this, I started to feel really like something, I'm going to reach a boiling point, something has to change, but I don't know how to change it. And I kept getting these messages that it was going to be okay, and I was going to have to do something hard, but I would make it through it and it would be okay. And I started to get this sense that I was going to have to quit. But not only that, how am I going to quit, right? So I eventually worked through like 2 months of back and forth with myself. How am I going to do this? I had to be okay with all my students leaving me, even though in the state of California there are no compete clauses, which in contracts, which mean that you have no allegiance to the place you're leaving, and actually people can come with you, clients can come with you, you just can't advertise to the person's regular list of clients. So anyway, I end up quitting. I wrote a letter, I quit. I go through this whole like month of intense turmoil as the woman's trying to pretending, or not pretending, but threatening to sue me, all kinds of things. But I came through it, and I established my own business, making pretty much twice as much money and working half as much. So big lesson, pat on my back. What a big thing to come through. But God, the whole, like that month or so, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I was so worried I was going to get sued, or she was going to hire a private investigator and trail me, which she had done to previous employers. So it was just, or employees, it was just this big, big thing. So anyway, fast forward to into my own spiritual business, and I start to see similar things popping up, like me giving too much, me giving too much away of my time, not charging enough, not really being secure in my worth. And so that's how I know that there are karmic lessons threaded through here, is when that same lesson, like I pat myself on the back, I came through that big thing with the woman I was working for. But I'm seeing parallel struggles still ongoing. And to me, that is a sign that, I have to establish my self-worth. I have to charge what I'm worth, right? I have to be okay with that and not feel guilty and about rocking the boat or making people upset or things like that. That's how I know that what I am undergoing is a learning contract. So share in the chat. Let us know if any of that's resonating with you. If you yourself have ever experienced anything like that. And just saying, merry meet and welcome to some joining us. Rebecca's here and Anthony, merry meet. Amy's here, Kelly, merry meet everybody. Angela and Cindy and Jenny. Welcome, everybody. So Rebecca says, I believe I'm here to learn unconditional love. And so what I believe is that when a person can say that, like Rebecca can say, she has latched on to a soul contract, or I shouldn't say, yeah, she's connected to it. She is aware of a soul contract. Now, she may not exactly know why, just like sometimes I don't know why, what mine's about, where does it come from. I don't need to know all the past life stories in order to recognize it in the present. The same way with Rebecca, you just need to be able to recognize it, right? So that she's got a lesson, a karmic lesson or a contract surrounding that. That's the work she's here for. Rebecca says, she says, I've shared 3 lifetimes, including this one with my own, or with my ex. She said to help him achieve his contract, and we are going to talk about mutual contracts as well. She said, I recently broke that contract and I will no longer share lifetimes with this person. Excellent. And we're going to talk at the end also about how to know when you've completed one and actually what to do if you want to break one like Rebecca did. It's sometimes we have way more control and power than we think. And Angela said she definitely feels like she has one revolving around problems setting boundaries, which is very common in people who are sensitive to energy. And Rebecca agrees with that. Anthony said, can I have a spiritual contract? Well, that's essentially what this is. These soul contracts are spiritual contracts because they're energetic. So if I'm not understanding the question, though, just rephrase it. But yes, Anthony said, I feel I'm here to learn and share my spiritual journey. Absolutely, absolutely. And so what I say, again, like with Rebecca's, is if you feel that that is a contract that you're here and that's a karmic lesson that you are here to complete, I believe that that is true for you. So it's really important to trust ourselves. We're going to talk about that a little bit at the end. When it comes to a lot of this soul work, self-belief and establishing trust in ourselves and our intuition and kind of knowing how the messages come through for us individually is going to be an important part of this work. Because if we're doubting everything, then we won't get very far with it because we're going to be doubting our own insight into the journey. So if Anthony or Rebecca or me, anybody who's kind of feels like they have a contract that they're working on and they're starting to identify, if we then negate it by questioning it all the time, you see how we're not going to get very far. Okay, so let's talk about the second type of contracts. So like I said, the learning contracts, these are agreements to grow and evolve and learn at the spiritual level and at the soul level. Healing contracts usually involve some kind of an emotional, an ancestral, or a karmic wound that we have come here to heal. So as opposed to learning a lesson, this is about some kind of a healing that we are here for. Oftentimes, healing contracts will be within families or will be within groups that sort of incarnate together as soul groups. And I'll talk a little bit about that later as well, kind of how to identify you're in a group, a soul group. The healing contracts will often revolve around inherited trauma. So perhaps there is trauma that looks like it's, we can have trauma within our own, this one incarnation, but we can also have trauma that feels like it's being passed down from one generation to the next. So another episode, if you're really feel like you have some kind of ancestral healing to do, or perhaps you have some kind of a healing contract that feels ancestral, I would recommend checking out another episode I have, which I did about a month or so ago, and that one was on ancestral healing. And I'm just going to pull up the YouTube here so I can hopefully put these, I'm going to put these links in the chat in just a little bit, but I just don't want to get distracted here. Okay, so these, like I said, these types of healing contracts may revolve around inherited trauma, some kind of lineage wounds. So there's a wound within the lineage, and there can be unhealed stories. So again, like I said, I would go back, and we're not going to get into that really deeply here, but I have a episode on ancestral healing, and let's just dump that into the chat, or drop that into the chat, I should say. And if you're watching back later on YouTube, this will be in the comments. Okay, so that one's on ancestral, and then I'll get the other one in just a bit that's on the past lives. So there also a person who finds themselves in a healing contract, they may be able to identify like roles that they play. So there can be like a fixer in the family. You may be the fixer. It often is energetically sensitive people. There may be a scapegoat. Sometimes people like us end up becoming the scapegoat or the black sheep or somebody who's always blamed in the family. You might be the peacemaker. The peacemaker can also is also often a pretty energetically sensitive person as well. And let me just drop in, I'm just grabbing this other episode while we're here in this moment. And then here I'm dropping in the chat the episode on past lives. Okay, so returning back to what we're talking about, there tends to be someone in every lineage, though, who is meant to be the pattern breaker. And that could also be you. You may feel that you are here to break some kind of a lineage wound within the family or within a group of souls that you feel that you're traveling with. So, for example, you might be the first in the family to be able to set boundaries. Maybe there are other people who aren't able to, or they set like the wrong kind or not in the right way, and you're here to set healthy ones, to change, like as we talked in the ancestral episode, to sort of break the pattern and then change the lineage so that it no longer carries the wound, and other people who are born after you within your lineage and your family line no longer have to suffer in that way. There could also be perhaps trying to like I said, set boundaries, find periods of rest. So sometimes there could be families that just like they never rest, they're working all the time. And you may be somebody who is here to establish the healthiness of rest. In fact, I was listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about rest as a part of a revolution. It's about being a rebel because our society teaches us that rest is bad. Don't get too comfortable. You always got to be working or you won't make it. And so we reward people who we think are very hardworking, and we idolize people who have a lot of money because we think they're really hard workers. But really, what rebellion can be about is changing that away from that fast-paced patriarchal drive to conquer things and take control of things, including ourselves and our time and our efforts and everything like that, and rather to find a softer, more feminine approach to life, more goddess-centered approach to life, which has nothing to do with gender. It's just a different kind of energy that we can live within, and understanding rest. So I'm off on a tangent, but you can have healing contracts around being the one to establish rest within a family line, or to break cycles that seem to be ongoing. And then a third type of contract that we could have are what are called the service contracts. And so that's kind of what Anthony was mentioning, like feeling it's a spiritual contract where he's here to heal, but then he's here to kind of teach his own story and something to other people who are also perhaps on a healing journey. So these types of contracts, they can involve mentors, they can involve teachers or guides, they can involve soulmates that people meet. And like I talked about in the past lives episode, soulmates does not necessarily mean you are meant to be with them forever in this lifetime, or for the duration of this lifetime. And I feel like that's a trap that sometimes people fall into. They think that they're in a relationship with a soulmate, and even when that's abusive, they continue to stay because they feel it's a soulmate, and that may be a soulmate. But some soulmates are not meant to be with you through the duration of your lifetime. They're meant to kind of come in, highlight a lesson, and then hopefully help you break a pattern and move on. There can also be people, so within these service contracts, there can also be people who lift us up, people who inspire us, people who shift our path. These people are catalysts. We'll talk a little bit more later about the different kinds of people who can come in and out of your life, but these people are catalysts. They tend to show up exactly when we need them. You don't know how many times I have heard people say, I decided I was ready for soul work, shadow work, energy work, insert your word here. And then I found your Witch's Guide to Shadow Work, or I stumbled across your YouTube, or I met you at a conference or something like that. I hear that a lot because as somebody who has been teaching others and for quite some time, I do feel that like the path will shift when it's time for you, the teacher or the person who can help catalyze you will show up, will appear. These people tend to appear suddenly or unexpectedly, or like I said, when you kind of ask the question and you're super aligned, that person might show up. The timing is usually perfect, though. They come right at the right time when you need them. The impact is usually meaningful, and it is a lasting contact, even if the person doesn't stay in your life forever. So there could be people who you meet like at a conference and you never will meet them again, but yet they said something in a lecture and it just literally changed your life. It got you on a different pathway, Try not to get distracted, but I'm going to give you a little example of my own when I finish this section. They can be it could be a friend that you meet in a spiritual class, and they just say something to you, and it changes the course of direction of your life. It can be someone who teaches you a skill, or teaches you a practice, or teaches you a mindset that becomes life changing, one that you adopt and you continue with your life. It can be someone who carries or just happens to arrive and carry the right energy at the right time for you, right when you need it. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, and I do want to mention that soul contracts, like I said at the beginning, and so for anybody who missed that beginning, they do require a belief in multiple lifetimes, in reincarnation, because they tend to cross over from incarnation to incarnation. I think that we choose certain people to be in our lives. I think that and now I'm like kind of talking about my own, like things I've read, things I've intuited, things that I've heard from other people. So it tends in a lot of my research that I've done on spirit babies, which I've done in my own journey because I've been on a fertility journey for many years. I've read a lot of books about spirit babies. How does the energy of a child enter the sphere of a person? And one of the things that is always talked about in these books is that there's way more going on than people realize when they become ready to have a child, or when they're struggling to have a child, or when they've lost children. So all of these souls, they kind of come near a person, and there can be contracts that people have with their mother, with their birth mother, with their birth father. And so where I'm going with all this is I know the majority of people listening to this are not reading about spirit babies or on a fertility journey like that and probably don't care about this. But what I made the connection here is that for us as adults who are looking back and we're trying to figure out like what are our contracts, what are the karmic patterns and things that we're here to work on, is to sort of understand that. So if mothers who are getting ready to have children have these sort of like souls kind of around them, think about that. When we were ready to incarnate, we got close to the people that we were going to be raised by. And that, like I said, and that can be birth mom, but that can also be, if it's going to be adoptive mom or adoptive dad or something like that, the spirit babies can also, will also get close to those people as well. And so one of the things that they talk about in a lot of these books is that we choose who the parents are. And that can be hard to swallow, especially if you have like abusive parents or parents you don't like. But we did choose them. And these books all seem to agree because there's some kind of a reason, a need to be around those people for specific lessons that we're meant to learn. So if you start to feel like, again, like you don't like your parents, you've got a lot of work that you need to do around it. There's been a lot of trauma, for example. This is not to excuse anything bad that they have ever done, but this is to say is like, don't feel so bad about it because it was part of the process of who you needed to be today. Again, don't miss me when I say this. I'm not excusing what they did, but look at it as the things that kind of strengthened you and built you into the person that you are today so that you could complete your soul lessons and you could evolve spiritually. So anyway, that's what I wanted to kind of mention about with the spirit babies. And like, I feel too, when you start to see truth, or it's not truth necessarily, but you start to see threads that sort of intersect from different things you're reading, I start to find spiritual truth in those. And so I kind of see all these books talking about this idea and mothers being able to say, yes, I could feel the energy of the baby when I lost them, after I lost them, or I felt them before they were coming in, or things like that. So we choose the people we're going to be immediately kind of raised by for specific reasons. Okay, so let's see here. Let's go on to the next topic. Actually, let me go back to the chat for a moment and let's see here. So Anthony said, "Oh, like when I talked about the healing contract, he said my heart stopped and my stomach dropped." Yeah, so like that's what I'm saying. Anybody who's energetically sensitive, which is a lot of you, kind of notice those feelings in your body when you hear certain things. They tend to be like, okay, pay attention because that is something that's important to you. Angela said, I feel like mine revolves around healing trauma in this incarnation, maybe to be a healer in another incarnation, or you never know. You can always be, you have plenty of life left to live in this one, so you can always become a healer. Sometimes people think, oh, it's too late in life to like shift and change things. Absolutely, you could absolutely still be a healer in this lifetime. And I believe many people who feel called to that path, even if they don't specifically go into a healing profession or a spiritual profession that helps them heal others, they're healing others just by sharing their story. That heals others too. But you're absolutely right. It could be like refining it in this lifetime so that you do even more of that healing work, or you become even a better healer in a future incarnation. Anthony said the trauma and abuse in my family, I feel like I'm a cycle breaker. I hear that a lot from people who get drawn to groups like ours. There tend to be a lot of cycle breakers among us. Joanne said, I'm definitely on a healing journey. And Anthony said, shifting my path and showing up when I need it. He said, that's you. I do hear that from, people because I talk a lot, and so you never know when something I say is going to shift and change the way that a person views life or what they do next. So whether that's a person who comes into my sphere, like Anthony, who kind of comes into shadow seekers, or just people who hear me talking on YouTube, for example, in passing, and it changes something for them. Joanne said, my twin flame passed 3 years ago. She said, I'm still grieving. We were everything wild and free with each other, a part contract, which will always be missing in this life. And it is terrible anguish to lose someone that we feel so connected to, a soulmate, a twin flame like that. I do believe that you can continue that relationship into other incarnations. I generally think that people who are very close in one incarnation tend to reconnect once they both cross through the veils, and also reconnect in future lifetimes as well. But the pain is still, that doesn't like do much to heal the pain or to change the pain in this lifetime. I know absolutely. Angela said, I had a friend who was a medium. She was very spiritual, and meeting and hanging around her changed my life. She said, I had someone to talk about these things that I've never been able to because of religious beliefs. So yes, so there could be like spiritual friends like that who kind of show up, and maybe you never, because of where you grew up or the family you're in, you just never had anybody talking about this stuff, and then all of a sudden you do. That is oftentimes an indication that we have like a soul friend, a soul contract with that person. Anthony said, "My parents, my first bad decision," and I think that I don't think it's a bad decision. Like, it may feel that way because it's so painful, and sometimes we're so traumatized by what they have done, but they were exactly what they needed to be for you to become who you had to be. Is really my firm belief. I've sometimes thought about, like, with my parents. Um, they have like a little bit of money. I mean, they're not super rich and by any means, but they have enough money that, and my dad was continues to be very good with the stock market. And so he was able to make enough money to pay for, like, he put money in the stock market the day I was born. And that's the money I used for grad school, for Berkeley College of Music, which is very expensive. Um, and I have often thought, like Anthony, like, it was a bad decision to choose these parents. There's nothing like inherently necessarily bad about them, but they're just so different than me, and they did not support me spiritually and emotionally in the way I needed to, and that caused a lot of trauma in my life. But I know, as exploring my own contracts, I was like, I sort of chose them because I knew that my life wouldn't be constantly struggling with money, because at least as I was growing up, they had enough for me. Um, so sometimes I've thought, like Anthony, that was a bad decision, though, to make that choice based on that. But at the same time, the more I've grown and evolved and understood it, I understand that they create exactly the situation that a person needs for what they need to become. Because, like, let's say they were like super open and super like able to help me with my spiritual gifts, would I be the same person I am if I hadn't come up through all the struggles, had to learn all of this stuff the hard way? Would I be able to teach what I can teach today, or have the insight I have today, if I'd had an easier go when I was little, when it came to this stuff? So that's something I think about. And then I'm like, I know I used to say it was a bad decision I made, but maybe it's not really that bad. It was just exactly what it needed to be. And we start to see that as we work through some of this stuff. Sam said, I honestly have not the least sense of any lineage or ancestry. I feel that my wife, Becky, may have been my soulmate, though I'm uncertain that it is to her benefit. I pray to be better for her in our next life. I doubt that I chose my parents, but whoever made the choice for me chose well. Yeah, and it could also be that there are guides too, because I believe that on the other side, when it comes time to incarnate, so just think about what I was saying with the spirit babies. So they start to show up in the aura of the person who's going to give birth, or the aura of the people who will raise them. And so during that time, I believe that your guides also, at least some of your guides also show up there and start to help to make some of the decisions about what the lessons will be and who the parents will be. So even if we feel like we didn't choose them, it could be like a guide help to choose them so that the right circumstances would be set for what we needed to learn. Okay. And Cersei said she had to leave and come back to see the chat. Yeah, sometimes I can't see the chat either. I have to open it in a separate window. Okay, so let me get back so I don't get too sidetracked here. So, how do soul contracts manifest in your life? Like, so how will you recognize them? So they can show up as the instantly familiar person. So there could be a person that you meet who you are instantly connected to, drawn to, or feel familiar with. So going back to my story about the woman that I worked for when I started working for her in 2013, I remember very clearly. I mean, it felt very familiar. Her learning center, herself, her children, the initial people that we would meet there. I felt like a great familiarity with it, which to me is an indication that this is part of a soul contract. There can be an immediate feeling of like, I know you. Now that does not necessarily mean that this person is from a past life, though there's a chance that they are. But you can also just have a contract with people just in this lifetime as well and still feel that familiarity. So sometimes we assume if we feel the familiarity, they must be from a past life. But the familiarity could also be that they're just it's your body, your energetic body kind of responding to the idea that this person is part of a contract you're at least completing or trying to complete here in this incarnation. There can also be like it's generally the identity that you connect to is at an energetic level, so you feel it in your body, you sense it in your body. It might just be a passing thought if you're claircognizant that I know this person or I know this path or something like that. Now that is sort of like the person that we instantly recognize, a person that we feel is from is part of our contract. Now, there can also be the trigger relationship. So, the trigger relationship is a little bit different. And it doesn't mean that the previous relationship that I talked about, the, uh, like I was talking about with my employer, it's not necessarily that it was a trigger relationship. It was more like this is just a pattern. This is a big lesson I'm going to have to work through. But the trigger relationships will be people who come in and they just push all your buttons and they do it immediately, and sometimes you don't know why. The role is generally to uncover some kind of shadow material or shadow aspects here. So we talk a lot about that in our shadow work, is like who irks or irritates or annoys you. Those are those are your trigger relationships, and they can also be karmic. There is also the catalyst. So I mentioned earlier, the catalyst is a person who comes into your life and they kind of shake it up, they shift it, or they change it in some really big way. So they will enter your life and they're going to create some kind of a meaningful shift. They're going to catalyze some kind of change within you. These relationships can be long or short term. So it could just be like a passing person that you meet that teaches you one thing, moves on, but that one thing changes the course of your life. Sometimes they are meant to activate you and to and then to leave. So like a person who's just kind of there and then goes. And then other times they can be people who are just going to stay in your life for a while. And then there is the ancestral contract, which is where we recognize that the person is somebody who's from our ancestry. And that could be a person who is in the immediate family, but it could also be somebody, because we, at least anecdotally, we have stories of people who say that that person who's now a friend or a boss or something like that was their mother in a previous lifetime. So you don't always have to incarnate into the same line to have those people from the familial line still be in your sphere, I should say. So the ancestral contract is usually about, or the ancestral, person is usually a part of the contract that is where we're trying to break a pattern, some kind of a generational pattern. These patterns or themes could surround like silence within the family, martyrdom, invisibility, or like obedience. But these are just a few of the different themes they could revolve around. So if you are interested more in the ancestral stuff, exploring that deeper, check out the other episode that I put in the chat about ancestor work. And also, if these things are really resonating with you and you feel you want to go deeper, I'll talk more about this at the end, but we do all of this stuff at a deeper level in our Shadow Seekers membership. And in fact, we're going to be doing a module on past lives and soul contracts very soon. And we're going to be diving, everything we're talking about today, we're going to dive into this way, way, way deeper. So stay tuned for that if you feel like this is something that's really resonating with you. So how do we understand the karmic patterns? Well, there is I guess the one thing we should mention is there's a difference between the contract and the agreement we make. Um, and I can't even read my writing on my notes sometimes. So usually this is like a main theme that is going to be worked on throughout the incarnation. So like with me, breaking the pattern of giving too much of myself away, not asking for what I'm worth, things like that. And it can show up as like over giving as well. So like when I've historically done this with a lot of jobs that I'm in. It's like I'm almost like I feel like I'm trying to prove myself or something. So I overgive, I overwork, because I'm trying to overcompensate for something, right? That maybe I don't feel like I'm worth what I really am worth or something like that. So there's like that is a theme, right? But then there can be a pattern or a loop that we fall into, and we sort of see it looping over and over and over again. And so, like, think about the job that I had, having to work through that, let go, stand up for myself, and then see similar themes resurface later as the continuation of that loop. It's how the energy will play out within relationships, especially familial, or ones where you are, maybe it's a relationship with a romantic partner or something like that, and you just see the loops going over and over and over again. Now that is sort of having to do with our contract. So the contract is what's it about? What's the lesson about? But there are also karmic patterns that we can identify that can kind of help us notice that this might be a soul contract. So think about if any of these have ever shown up in your life, like repeated emotional lessons. So it's like the repeating part is the key word here. Repeating relationships. So noticing that this person is very similar to another person or to another person, or maybe you have the insight and you're able to recognize that perhaps you knew that person in another lifetime. It can be like an emotional wound that you're facing today, but you feel like you faced it in, perhaps you have insight that you faced it in past lives, or perhaps you can remember facing something similar when you were younger in this incarnation. Other ways to kind of sense that there's like some karmic work that needs to be done here is that feeling that you are like magically pulled towards a certain place, or pulled towards a certain person, or pulled towards a certain idea. It can feel like deja vu. Like I said, deja vu does not necessarily have to be about past lives. It can simply be like you're remembering because before you incarnated, you knew what your lessons were. You kind of agreed on them, right? That's the whole idea here with the soul contracts. You agreed on it. And then you get here and you've forgotten it, because if you knew what your soul contract was, there'd be no reason for the incarnation. There'd be no reason for the work because you already know it. So you're here you forget it, and then you're here to try to remember it. And that's really what your soul contract work is, and some of your past life work is. It's about trying to remember what you can, even if it's just the patterns, even if it's just the themes. trying to remember what you can so that you're better able to work on those things in this lifetime. Now, signs that you are in a karmic loop. So let's say you're in a karmic loop with a person, a situation. You may feel that you know better, but the pattern feels inevitable. So if you've ever had that sense before, that could be a sign that you're in a karmic loop. You attract similar partners or friends or authority figures in your life. So you kind of see them showing up. So if you think back to your life, think back to like different parts of your life, your 20s, your 30s, your teens, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s. Do you notice similar people popping up throughout those different parts of your life? That could be an indication that there's a karmic loop ongoing. You may feel stuck, even though you're doing spiritual work. That can be a sign that you're in a kind of karmic loop. And that's okay. It can feel frustrating, but all it means is that we're identifying it. And then once we identify it, then we can actually do something about it. Something in the pattern may feel unfinished. You just get that sense that something isn't quite complete. So here's a prompt for you that you could either just think about, you can journal on, or if you like to pull cards around your prompts, you can do that. So here's a question. Where do I keep ending up, or where do I keep ending up in the same emotional story? So like where in my life do I keep ending up in the same emotional story or in the same story? That would be something I would contemplate in your work and see what comes up for you, or pull some cards or journal. And then here's another prompt. Is this pattern showing me a need that I have not yet met? So is this pattern showing me a need that I have not yet met? So let us now talk. So I'm going to have to speed up to finish this last little bit here. And I've got a couple questions for the Q&A, and then I will go to the chat. So keep putting in the chat if there's things that you're resonating with or questions you have. Are soul contracts fixed, flexible, or breakable? So I mentioned in the beginning, Rebecca had talked about like making the connection that she had this soul contract with an ex who had been from previous lifetimes, and then making the decision she was breaking it in this lifetime. So I do believe that you can make that decision. You have more power than you think about this. So the idea here is that contracts are living energies. That means that they are not like inert. They have energy in them, and anytime that we have energy, energy can shift and change. So patterns can be changed and shifted just like these contracts can. So they can evolve as you evolve. So like I mentioned earlier, the issue with the woman I worked with evolves into an issue with my own businesses today. So similar patterns, but a different story, right? How would a person know that a contract was completed? Well, sometimes you may think it's completed. Like, believe me, I thought the pattern was completed when I did all that hard work back in 2023 and left the job and suffered through that month of her like threatening me and things like that. Um, only to find that it resurfaces at a different level later. But you will sometimes know that a lesson is completed when it feels like the lesson has been learned, or kind of going back to my example, it feels like it was learned at one level, but then I grew spiritually, and then I'm at a higher level spiritually, and now I'm actually able to deal with the lesson at a higher level. That's kind of what I think happens with things like that. You may find that the emotional charge is neutralized. So if there's something that you thought was a karmic pattern or you thought was a soul contract and it used to make you very emotional and now it doesn't, and it feels more neutralized, that could be a sign that it's been broken or it's complete. Relationship shifts dramatically in some way, or you no longer feel obligated or entangled up with the person or with the situation, or the problem just stops showing up. So I was listening to a speaker once talking about shadow work, and she was talking about all these like this pattern that could kept showing up in her life, and she sort of figured it out, and then all of a sudden the pattern stopped showing up. So that can be an indication that the karmic loop has been broken, or you've completed at least that part of the lesson. So can you renegotiate? So like Rebecca said, I've decided I'm breaking it in this lifetime. So I do feel that you absolutely can renegotiate. You can decide that you want to shift it, you want it to be different. Maybe you can't get out of the lesson because remember, it is something that's for your soul growth, but you could shift how you look at it, and you could shift the catalysts that come into your life to inspire the work. So, for example, if you feel like it's too heavy, you can always say to the universe, say to your guides, just go into a meditative state and just speak from your soul. I'm ready for a kinder version of this lesson. You are always allowed to do that. I'm ready for a kinder version of this lesson. Maybe I'll be able to handle the deeper, harder stuff later, but right now I'm ready for a kinder version of it. You could say things like, I don't need to learn this anymore because I've got it. Now, keep in mind, you may think that you've got it right now, and it may still resurface at another time at a higher level, but at least for now, you can say, I'm ready to move on from this lesson. I release this karmic struggle, but I can still keep the connection. So we can release the struggle with people or situations and still keep the connection. You are allowed to renegotiate what you want. So when can you release, and what could you do to release? So I would say that if you feel that a contact or a contract that you're sensing you have is really harmful, I think it is fair for you to ask to release it in this lifetime, especially if it's super harmful to you and you don't feel like you're getting anywhere with it. You always have the choice and the ability to ask and to kind of send that message to the universe that I'm ready for this one to be released. If it feels like it's draining your life force and you don't have any support, that could be another time to like either ask to put it on pause or to ask to release it. And then sometimes it'll just feel like the purpose is complete. So, so like I said, there are, once you kind of decide that something is complete, you can always sort of visualize the cords being cut. You can do something symbolically to disconnect from the lesson or kind of complete the lesson. So you could do a cord cutting. You could write down things about what you're letting go and you could burn it. You could light a candle to represent the soul contract and you could put the candle out. You could bury something. So there's a lot of ways that you could symbolically let go of the energy as well. The kind of the final thing I wanted to mention before I go into the Q&A is that when it comes to this work, so I kind of mentioned this earlier, it's important that you try to anchor into your self-belief and your trust in yourself. Because again, if you're going to doubt everything that's coming through for you, you won't get very far with the work. So you have to make a decision. I'm going to trust myself. I call it like radical self-belief or tenacious self-belief. It's just like I'm going to trust myself. I'm going to believe that the messages that are coming through or the feelings I'm having are valid and true and real. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to get very far with the work. But what I also do think it's helpful is to understand which of the clair senses you receive insight and messages through. Some people are clairvoyant and they actually kind of see imagery. But that is not the only way that a person can tap into intuition. Some people are clairsentient, which means they feel it in their bodies. So like when Anthony said earlier, like the stomach drop, the heart flutter, people feel chills, they feel tingles, they just feel in the center that that's right, what they're hearing resonates and it's right. That is a way that you can know that you are gaining insight around the karmic patterns, around the soul contracts. If you are clairaudient, it may sound like a voice in your head that is not your voice. The voice of the higher self could be the one that is like, yeah, that. Listen to that. A little bell that goes off. There's something true in that statement to listen to. Other people might, like I said, it might be claircognizant. They just know that what they're hearing resonates. So really think about tapping into your clairs. We actually have an episode on the clair senses. I can't remember which number it is, but I will find it later and I will drop that in the chat. And if anybody would like to go and check that out, learn more about the clairsenses and try to figure out what your main clairsense is, how your intuition speaks to you, and then really use that, anchor into that, and use that to help you kind of validate some of what's coming through for you when it comes to your soul contracts and your karmic patterns. So, if you want to do the deeper work, of course, consider joining our Shadow Seekers membership. Now is a great time to join because we have an offer from now until Thursday. So it's going on for like 2.5 more days where you get a month free in the membership to try it out. See if it's the right fit for you. And we have a big announcement this year because next year, I've told you I have like these karmic patterns to work through. And when I decided that I was going to raise the price of the membership because everybody else offering this work doing less are charging way more, I kind of made that decision, and all my guides were like celebrating me doing that. So that's also how I knew that I was making a good decision. So anyway, what this means for you is that you can still join at our regular price, which right now is $37, which is like a crazy low price for everything you get. People who are in Shadow Seekers will tell you it's like incredible what you're getting for that low of a price. You get monthly workshops on topics like this. So I take these topics, I extend these into like 2-hour workshops with slides, and you come on Zoom, you can interact with me, you get replays of everything. Everything's in a portal. You get monthly rituals to come to kind of embody some of the practices we are learning. We have monthly themes. The theme of December is intuition and the third eye. We have office hours where people just drop in and chat and share what they're working on and get support and support the rest of the group. I can go on and on and on with all the benefits. We have live yoga classes and live breath work and Kundalini energy classes. You got a portal with all of this stuff so you can go and you can set up a spiritual practice for yourself. An added bonus that isn't in the membership yet but is coming in the next week is I have a full little mini course called How to Do Shadow Work that is if anybody came to my shadow work workshop, How to Do Shadow Work, last week on Zoom, it was a free workshop. I'm expanding that into a small course, and everybody in our membership gets access to that, and it will help you kind of really set up your shadow work practice, your energy work practice, so that it works for you and you can stay consistent and stay focused on your path. So I can just go on and on and on and on about the membership, but like I said, we will be diving deeper into soul contracts and past life work as well. So if this is something that interests you, consider joining us. $37 a month is the price. It's going up in 2026. So this is the last time to lock it in. When you lock it in, even when the price goes up, your price stays exactly where it is for as long as you stay a member, and you get a month free to try it. So really, it's like, to me, it's a no-brainer. If you've been on the fence about whether you want to take your spiritual work, your shadow work, your energy work to the next level, this should be your sign that this is the time to do it now. And our shadow seekers are awesome. It's like a little family that we've created, so supportive. If you've been looking for connection and a belonging and just not having to do this alone, consider joining us. So let me drop the link in the chat. For those who are interested, you can go to our website and you can check it out, and you can decide if it feels like this is right for you. And like I said, there's about 2.5 more days to go. The offer closes at midnight on Thursday, the 4th of December. Let me just talk about a few other things that are coming up. On 12/9, that's next week, I'm going to be doing an episode on magical timing. So we're going to just look at seasonal energy, lunar energy, and the energy of your own personal cycles and how you can tap into that for your growth, for your magic, for your spell work, and everything in your mundane and your magical lives. And then on 12/16, it's a little early, but we're going to do our episode, The Witch's Guide to Yule and Winter Solstice, because winter solstice is at the end of that week, and I like to do my episodes before the solstice before the Sabbath comes. And then on 12/23, I'm going to be off because my parents will be in town. And then on 12/30, we're going to do a special episode on energetic alignment for the new year. So get everybody prepared for the new energy that's coming in and letting go of the energy that they would like to let go of. All right, so we're going to go into the chat. If you've got a question, drop it in the chat. It does not have to be about soul contracts. It can be about anything related to shadow work, energy work, or witchcraft. And let me see here. So Joanne said, when I had my double heart attack last spring, I saw my past four selves. She said, my mom and my grandmother as I knew them. Yeah. So sometimes too, we'll go through traumatic physical experiences like that and then be able to see past lives or connections that we have with people. It's a story that we hear a lot from those who've gone through, like, had a stroke or had a heart attack or had I had a near-death experience a few years ago when I almost died from an ectopic pregnancy, and you definitely can gain a lot of insight when we go through those terrible, terrible physical traumas. Anthony says, join Shadow Seekers. Angela said she did, and she's happy that she did. Anthony says, yes, the same type of people tend to show up. That's how we know we're kind of in those karmic loops. And Rebecca said she feels that we heal we heal at multiple levels. Anthony is ready for a kinder version of this lesson. Love that. Yeah, so you can always, people don't realize that they can say that to the universe. You can tell the universe what you want. And sometimes we don't even think that we can, and so we don't even try. Angela said, I have a man who keeps entering and exiting my life. I feel like he's a soulmate. He genuinely loves me, and I have a difficult time accepting love. So maybe that is why he keeps popping in. Absolutely. And popping in at times, like, if he's popping in and out in those spaces of the time, you are growing, you're evolving spiritually, right? So he pops in and you kind of revisit the lesson, and then maybe he leaves again. And eventually, though, you heal enough, you work through enough of your karmic patterns, enough of the work in the soul contract, and you eventually do, and work with your heart chakra and maybe some of your other chakras, and eventually you will probably find that you are more expansive yourself and you are more able to accept love, and then the time will be right for the relationship. So I do think when people pop in and out of our lives, there's something to pay attention to there. And then Rebecca, she kind of agrees with that. Like, she said, that's exactly the reason she's ready for different lessons. And like I said earlier, we could tell the universe kind of, I'm ready to move on from that lesson. It doesn't mean it won't resurface later when we're at a more evolved place to kind of revisit it later. But you actually have the power now to say, I'm kind of ready for different lessons. I'm moving on. I'd like to move on from it, at least for now. Angela says she usually gets a ringing or tingling in her ears. That's another thing I didn't mention, is like that tends to be connected to clairaudience, and that can be a way that people know they're receiving insight. Joanne said, I get a queasy feeling in my stomach when the answer is no, and nothing when it's yes. Very important to recognize how your no and your yes works, because it's different for everybody. I find that sometimes people feel intuition in the gut, and when I tried that's actually not how I feel mine. I feel more anxiety there. So once I was able to realize that's not how I feel my intuition, I'm more claircognizant. I became better with my intuition when I realized that not everybody feels it the same way. Um, and then Kelly said, it is so beyond worth it. Okay, so she and Anthony are mentioning about shadow seekers. She said, it's been everything I was looking for to help encourage me on my spiritual path. I'm super grateful to be part of the group. Highly encourage it to anyone on the fence. And Rebecca says, yes, it's an awesome membership. So we have a lot of shadow seekers in the chat right now, but definitely think about joining it. Taliesin said, this is the best thing I've done. Don't let this pass you by. It really is a wonderful family. And Angela said, I'm a new member and I love the setup because it lets me learn what I want to learn one step at a time. And that's like how the portal works. You can go in and you can, kind of control the topics that you want to study. And you can also engage in the theme for the month. So it's really it can be a DIY adventure. on one level, but it's also kind of come in and be guided with the group as well. And you just kind of choose what resonates with you at that time. So definitely don't kick yourself in 2026 when you decide it's time, but now the price has gone up dramatically. Jump in now, get your free month. Let me now go on to the video's going pretty long here, but I'm just going to answer 2 questions I have, and anybody else who's got any questions, put them in the chat. So Anthony said, is there a certain reason why you think I'm drawn to tarot at this point in my practice? So I think that for anybody, I think that's very important to kind of recognize what you're drawn to. Sometimes people come to the path and they want to do everything, and then they just spin their wheels and don't get very far very fast. So I think when a person comes in and they're very drawn to a specific part of the path, that is so insightful to know, because that gives you a direction and a place to study. So it could be like you had mentioned that you feel as part of your contract that you are here to kind of heal and then begin to heal other people. And tarot could be a modality through how you heal people. So maybe eventually becoming a reader yourself, trusting that you read for yourself and then trusting that you can read for others. But it also could just also be the step that you're in your journey right now. It's the tool that you most resonate with. To me, it's so good when people feel that they have that direction, because then I know that person's not just going to be spinning their wheels trying to learn everything at once. They have like a direction and something that they want to direct their energy to. And you may find that that shifts, like you kind of you get to a level where you feel you've mastered tarot enough, and then perhaps another part of the pathway opens and a new thing sort of comes into your periphery to learn. So I think that's kind of my thoughts on why you would be drawn specifically to tarot right now. And then let's see, CB also had a question, and his question is about thoughts on keeping your practice in the broom closet. And so one of the things is, it was a longer question and I wanted to be able to read a little bit of it to you. But he says, what are your thoughts on being in the broom closet versus the hidden nature of the occult? And then going on into the question, let me just, I have the feeling that there are others who've wondered this, and so I do want to start a dialogue about it, but let me see if I can find, I meant to pull the full question up, and there I see it. Okay, so he says that on one hand, the path is a great source of healing and personal empowerment for me, as I know it is for many others. This is something to be celebrated. I truly enjoy witchcraft aesthetics and the folks out there talking very openly about their craft, and I've learned a great deal from them. But on the other hand, I'm also really drawn to the secretive nature of the occult. Don't mean this in a gatekeeping way, but I greatly enjoy the fact that the path is non-proselytizing and everyone has to find their own way to it. He said, I'll admit to getting a bit of a thrill out of occult symbols and practices that are hidden in plain sight. So there's sort of like this, 2 sides to the issue, right? Is like being out of the broom closet versus kind of enjoying the secretive nature of the craft. And I think that people can have both of those. So these are just thoughts of mine, and there is no right or wrong answer to this. And I do invite others in the chat, if you're watching back later on replay, jump into the conversation. Let us know what you think about this. So I think, just my thoughts. So on one hand, being in the broom closet can be a painful thing to some people. There are, at least in the United States, there aren't many religions that have to hide as much as ours does. Or if you don't consider religion a spirituality, there are not many who have to hide as much as we do. We have a traumatic history. We have traumatic personal histories from families, many people raised in highly Christian families who are critical, who downplay gifts or like try to negate them or drive them out of children. And so this pain gets carried with people, and one way to heal the pain is to be out and open. And so we see this with other movements, like with transgender people or LGBTQ plus communities wanting to be out and open about who they are and not wanting to hide. And I think a similar thing can happen with people in witchcraft, Wicca, any pagan path that they are on. They have this need to be out and open because they've had to hide, because they've been forced to hide or someone told them they had to. So on one hand, there's sort of that celebration of being out, and it's not for everybody. But I do think that's what drives some of it. And like for me, having to be partially closeted from my family, still thinks I'm running a yoga business. So there is a great pain that I carry behind not being able to be fully open in that way. Now, on the other hand, what CB is saying, there is this beauty in the occult and the secrets. And so you can be out and open about being a witch by just being able to say I'm a witch and not hiding the pentacle, but you can still be secretive about what you do. So in the witch's pyramid, remember there's one part of the pyramid that's called to be silent, and there's great debate about what that means. On one hand, silence was about keeping the practices silent so you wouldn't get killed or persecuted in the past. And then on another level, the silence is about like not being, not telling everybody about what you're doing or inviting negative energy into like your path by telling the wrong people or people are going to think negative things, right, or send negative energy. And then on the other hand, there's the idea of the esoteric aspect of this, the occult aspect, where many of these things are hidden. They're things that learners have to learn on secret pathways. And so there's secretiveness. So like, for example, in our coven, we don't share things, everything with people on the outside. We have secrets. So we may be out. Some people are more out than others in the group as witches, but then there are also secrets that we keep within the coven, which is like our liturgy that we don't share with everybody, or we don't share what we do, what we talk about in the coven with everybody. So these are just some of my thoughts. I feel like people can find a medium place or middle ground where they feel comfortable, enough is out or enough is hidden. Again, it's like there's not a right or wrong answer. I love the question, and I love that it starts to open a dialogue. So I encourage you, if you like the question, you have something to share about it, please share in the chat and keep the dialogue going. But great question, CB. It's a great conversation starter to just hear what other people have to think about it. So I've gone way over, so I'm going to end for tonight. But it's great being with you as always. Consider joining us in Shadow Seekers. We are open for 2.5 more days. We would love to have you join us in our family. Check out the link below. I will see you next week, and I'm sure I've missed a bunch of comments and questions as I'm ending now, and so I'll go back and I will look at those and read those and respond afterwards. Make sure to leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the episodes. We make sure we get this to the feed of more people. Subscribe to our Body Mind Witchcraft YouTube channel if you have not already. Watch some of our videos. We're trying to get to, I believe it's 3,000 video view hours in the year, and you'll help us out with every video that you watch. Until next time, blessed be.